What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Third and 10 podcast. It's Nathan Nguyen, your host. As always, thank you for listening. Episode 7 now of the podcast. And as you can see, I'm by myself, but not for the whole episode. We have a special guest for you today. This man is very, very accomplished. He was formerly a coach at St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He spent time with notable NFL players, Hall of Famers like Jason Taylor and Sam Madison, both playing for the Miami Dolphins, by the way. He's worked with defensive backs at the University of Florida Atlantic and also the University of Miami. He was also the receivers coach at Concordia University, St. Paul, Minnesota, as well. Oh, and by the way, most importantly, he is the owner of a sports technology company known as HyperSpeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Wilson himself, Antone Wilson, if I'm not mistaken, correct, sir?
Antone, but you could just
Antone.
call me Coach. Keep it simple.
I love it, Coach. First off, Coach, it's an honor and privilege to have you on this episode. And I'd be rude if I didn't ask, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I recently helped some family move out to South Florida, and this is where I spent the early stages of my adult life. So this is home for me, and the weather is great. I just love being around here, man. So I'm really happy. You caught me at a really good time.
Yes, sir. We're excited to have you to talk some ball about your, life career path, I should say as well. And let's just get started, shall we, sir?
Let's rock and roll, baby.
Let's rock and roll. Simply, let's start with this. Your journey to where you are right now. How did you get here, coaching wise, to being an owner of a technology company like Hyperspeed? How'd you get here, sir?
Yeah, I would say it started with my love of sport, and that was football. You hear the story of Kobe Bryant when he was growing up and how he was just like a maniac of just training and just had this just aggressive mindset of just trying to be the best he can be. Well, I think that defines my childhood for the most part. At 5, 6 years old, I said, I'm going to play in the NFL. And I think that dictated every decision that I made from then on out. I was able to name every single team on like a t-shirt, identifying them by their logo when I was like 5 years old, which is pretty crazy. And so I started playing ball when I was really young and went to camps all throughout the country and got a lot of exposure to the game. Also took a visit to the NFL Hall of Fame. My dad played semi-pro football, and I was the water boy at 5, 6 years old. And so that was really all I knew. I was fortunate enough to play at a high school where we had a Heisman Trophy winner. Doug Flutie went to my high school, and I was fortunate
Okay.
to be around him in a program that had a legacy of winning. My high school head coach is one of the top 5 leading winners in Massachusetts state history in high school football in the Massachusetts Hall of Fame. And so just getting access to all these amazing things from a young age presented me the opportunity to then go play football in college. And I went to a JUCO that had a handful of guys that ended up in NFL camps. The most notable one was Lucky Whitehead. He played for the Cowboys. Now he's killing it in the CFL right now. And so that was where I recognized that I'm probably not going to go pro. Fast forward, when I went to my 4-year school, I had 2 ACL injuries, and that allowed me to begin developing as a professional quite rapidly. So I started coaching. I was a student assistant to doing public speaking at local elementary schools to also in sports performance. And sports performance defined a lot of who I am. And that's because I knew I wanted to go pro. So I had to get the access to the information to make myself a better athlete. I'm 5'0". I like to say I'm really about barely 5'6" on my best day.
Okay.
Roster back in the day, we'll probably talk about this, propped me up to 5'8". I'm not even close. You know how the game goes.
Most definitely.
But no, so sports performance, I had a trainer at the age of 13, and I was doing all this speed training, and I started learning about the science really quickly. So when I had the ACL injuries, I really understood like the human body and what I was going to have to do to get myself back to the level that I was previously at. And so I had this sort of diverging path, but they sort of, I guess, corresponded with one another. And that is sports performance and working as a trainer which as soon as I finished my undergrad, I was a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And that's almost like the premier certification to like be a strength and conditioning coach at the collegiate level or train pro athletes. And so I got that, and I was working with pros and training pros at 23 years old, but I still had eligibility left. And so it's sort of like I had this professional trajectory. I had 2 years of coaching under my belt, was training pro athletes, but I knew that if I didn't try playing ball one more time, it was going to haunt me. And I don't like living with regrets, and I don't want to leave anything on the table. So, sort of summing it up, into how I got here was that I went to grad school. I was a grad transfer. This is how I found myself at Concordia University, St. Paul, as a receiver. I was a 23-year-old grad transfer, and buddy of mine or an acquaintance, we developed a relationship. Andrew Hawkins currently works on ESPN. He had told me he was training at the gym I was at, and he was like, hey man, if you go to a school as a grad transfer and you get a little bit of film, you might be able to land a tryout somewhere. It's like, you got the talent. I think you could play. So go there, play a semester, and see what happens if you get some film. Well, things are going well. I was the go-to receiver. I was killing it at camp. I was a real leader, and I'm 23, so I'm like a player coach at this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I blew my knee out on the third day of camp for the third time. And that's when I was like, hey, I wanted to do this. I gave it a try. It didn't work. Okay, it's time to start developing as a professional. From there, I dabbled back and forth between becoming a college coach as a grad assistant, was a full-time wide receivers coach, to then I worked at like a high-grade tech facility where a handful of NFL guys were training at. And it was from there, I was like, okay, I don't want to do the training thing. Let me go all in on coaching. And that's what led me. I went from being a head freshman football coach at a small school in Minnesota to the next year I'm at St. Thomas Aquinas, and I'm a finalist for an internship with the Dolphins. And it wasn't until I'm 25, 26 at this point, and I didn't get that job. And I was a finalist for an internship with the Seahawks the year before. And I had put my heart and soul into ball. And at that point, I was like, I have a window right now where I don't want to do this coaching thing anymore. I want to start a company. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, I don't know if I'll ever have this much independence again. So let me just start a company. And that's what's taken. That was probably in late 2019. And as we dive forward into this conversation, I'll tell you a little bit about the progression of my company and what we do. But it's been about 4 years now. I always look at life in 4-year increments. 4 years of ideating, learning, taking myself from being, I always say I'm just a dumb football coach, to learning about data and technology, to developing a tool to help people in the space that I am most passionate about. And so it's just been an organic process of trials and tribulations, personal development, and taking something that I'm passionate about and my fundamental skill set and creating the job that didn't exist.
It just seems like your love for the game is just there. I think for the both of us, football has been a big part of our lives, especially for yourself from the coaching, going through adversity with the injuries and whatnot, and your love for the game is still there. It's just something that it's just eye popping to not just me, but for a lot of people who are listening and watching, because it's just you've gone through so much, yet you still continue to fight and go through different avenues, and to be where you are right now, it's definitely an accomplishment. I do want to before we dive into the relationship between technology and the game of football, because let's be honest, Coach, those two have kind of gone a little closer than what we're used to seeing compared to previous years. But you talk about owning a company, HyperSpeed is what it's called. Could you explain how that all began per se?
Yeah. So I remember training in like 2015, 16, and I wore a heart rate monitor, and it was something I had to put around my chest. And I also had a watch. Okay. And that would be able to detect how many calories I was burning when I worked out. It could also detect how high my heart rate was, which in different zones that I was in, which would identify like the rate of intensity and how hard I was training. And I'd also wear it when I was sleeping. And so it was telling me what my recovery was like and if I was ready to train again at that same intensity the next day. I was intrigued by that because I was all about trying to get the edge. Now, I worked at a wellness center that had a body composition analyzer called the InBody. And a lot of the listeners at home are probably familiar with that device. And it's just like a high grade medical scale that when you step on it, it can detect like your body fat percentage, your muscle mass, the amount of muscle that you have comparatively in each limb, and identify if there's any asymmetries. I got exposure to that device. And then when the pandemic happened, we got exposed to like remote work and beginning to like digitize various processes. So I was fortunate enough to come across a company called Able based out of Norway, and the founder played Division I soccer here in the States. And he was really passionate about sport and wanted to create just change in that avenue, but more so from the lens of like general health and helping trainers sort of scale their skill set and be able to reach more people. Now, I was a trainer at the time, and so I was an early adopter of the tool. I was just so passionate about it that I wanted to learn more about technology and how I can basically take my skill set and turn it into intellectual property to make myself more accessible to a greater number of people. Because if you're working with like a handful of different clients or a team, you're just, you're handicapped because you can only work with those amount of people, that small number of people, and now your impact is just limited. So I thought that was really unique, and I was presented the opportunity to bring that product to the US market. And so now I was going to different gyms, athletic programs, physical therapists, investors, and just saying, hey, I have this company, this is what it does. And I was fortunate enough, we had about 35 paying customers, which was just a software that coaches would utilize, and they can distribute fitness programs. And then their clients could track their meals, and they can see when their clients either logged a meal or completed a workout. I thought that was really cool. I was like, okay, now we have this element of accountability, because if I train you, that I might work with you for 1 hour a day, 2 or 3 times in a week, but there's 23 other hours in the day and I don't know what you're doing. And I obviously referenced before now the impact of heart rate and sleep and those various things. And I recognized that wearable devices were becoming just like a prominent device that a lot of people utilize. I guess the number is like over 1 billion people worldwide are wearing a wearable in some shape or form. And so trying to connect all those things together to just maximize the user experience of allowing people, or rather assisting people on their health journey to getting in tip-top shape, utilizing all of these tools that were accessible, and recognizing that like, okay, they're going to give us different data outputs. How can I connect this data with artificial intelligence to essentially tell a story about the individual? Now, that was the problem that I had set out to solve. And so I found that it was like a lot more political from the lens in which like we're trying to really like tackle healthcare here, because we're trying to change processes in regards to like the information that's gathered in regards to like the protocol to allow someone to understand what their health condition is and what they need to do to improve it. That process from meeting the founder of Able to selling the product to realizing that the market didn't really want that product, there was a greater problem at hand, to developing a tool to solve that problem and just getting rejected and realizing that I was trying to do way too much.
Yeah.
And the market didn't want it. And so I found myself having to pivot, and then recognizing that this data and these insights would be most suitable for an athlete in sport. And it was an organic process of basically going around the world in a 360 and learning about data and technology and healthcare to realize like, whoa, the answer was right in front of you. And so that's how I segued into technology, which was really just a genuine curiosity of recognizing where the future was going within the industry.
100%. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about how much technology has kind of taken over the sports industry. We saw in the beginning with football where tablets were introduced to NFL sidelines and whatnot. That's just a small, example. But we see what with baseball, right, coach, about I know this is mainly about football, but shifting to baseball for just a second,
I
we
was
see.
going to reference Moneyball too. Like that's where I
Yes,
was going
please.
next.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, please.
Big in the analytics. I'm sorry. Please resume. But yes, I'm totally with you. You can't talk about data analytics,
Yeah,
its rise in sport without referencing baseball.
yeah, because you mentioned Moneyball, and my mind just went. That was like my one of my favorite movies of all time. And just the story of how the Oakland Athletics, who ironically is my favorite team in baseball, they kind of differed from the norm. Like they did things so differently, in terms of not getting the best players per se, but using different numbers, specific data, like batting average and stuff like that to kind of replace the big names that they lost. But I won't dive too much into that. But shifting back to baseball, for the point was how robo umps are slowly kind of taking over the baseball world. And the reason why I bring that up is because, Coach, do you just feel like the whole technology coming to sports is 100% a good thing, or do you feel like it's sort of a negative to an extent?
Well, let's look at why the Oakland A's got into this Moneyball model.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay, desperation leads to innovation. And in baseball, the wealth of the owner and how much an organization is willing to spend is going to determine the quality of players that you're going to get, right? Well, the Oakland A's, they don't have a lot of capital and they were limited at that period of time. They're not historically a winning franchise or a team that has this rich legacy like the Cubs, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Dodgers.
Yeah.
They're not one of those teams. So they're going to have to think differently, which I absolutely love. And so it's like we're going to have to dissect, well, what are the metrics or the attributes that are desirable, that are perhaps in like the blind spots of most scouts, in which like these are actually the traits that are helping teams win games amongst players, in saying, okay, like this guy's under recruited and he might not do like the things that everyone sees on paper really well. He might not be the biggest guy, might not have a rocket arm, he might not have this batting percentage, but in this unique situation, he does this very, very well. And how can we now let the data tell us these are players that have high value relative to the way that we want to play? Now, that's just one example. Now, I'm not an expert in baseball, so I
Yeah,
don't want to continue diving into that, but I will give you another example that applies, and then we can really dive into data now, because I know that the data
definitely.
is accessible, and it's been there for the last 20 years. And you look at like in basketball, they have all sorts of advanced metrics. But in any realm of data and technology, the data is only as good as its application. But peeling back for a second, Mike Leach, the the founding father of really the spread offense
Yep.
in modern football, I would say, putting 4 or 5 receivers on the field, throwing the ball 45 plus times a game. Now, he started off with this guy, Hal Mummy, they were at like some small school in like West Virginia or Ohio, like a D2 school. And they had really, really small linemen, and they could not really compete up front. And so they're like, shoot, well, we got a bunch of receivers. Let's just throw the ball, but let's make it even easier. Let's let our receivers begin to adapt their route based on the coverage on the field. So if like they see a zone, they're going to settle in the little hole. If they see man, they're going to convert it upfield. And basically having like 3 to 4 different route concepts in which the receivers can adapt on the fly. And now the game turned into like backyard football for the quarterback. Well, fast forward, they found themselves at Kentucky. Then he went to Oklahoma. Then he got the head coaching job at Texas Tech. And there were a handful of players that dominated in that system in the early 2000s. Then Mike Leach and the Air Raid and all his coaches that played underneath him started getting head coaching jobs. And now every high school in Texas now runs that offense, which created a whole bunch of quarterbacks. And we see Lincoln Riley and what he's doing. So now the influence of one guy, Mike Leach, has totally revolutionized the way the sport of football is played, in which now quarterbacks are all dual threats and they sit there and sling the ball. And it really just started because at the small school that he was at, he had no linemen and couldn't run the traditional 2-back set and play power football the way everyone used to play it. And everyone just followed the trend. Fascinating how quickly trends spread and how just the the sheer need of thinking differently about a problem led to a revolution. Well, now in data, right, with data analytics in sport, it's like, okay, we know that this data is there, but what are we going to do with it? Now you
Yeah.
have Pro Football Focus, and like in basketball, you have like the analytics craze, like the Houston Rockets were the first. And I've written about this quite a bit. We're like, we're not going to shoot mid-range jumpers. We're just going to go for layups and three-pointers. This is not an efficient shot. Well, this is going to transform the type of players that we get, what we're going to define as a good shot. And now we need to find the right coach that has the knowledge of this system to implement this with the right set of players. Now, some people are all for it, and it's really like an organization's adoption as a whole. You need all hands on deck. You can't be like kind of in here. However, it's difficult to get the players to buy into the numbers because it's like players are like, I'm instinctual. I do things as I see and as I feel. You're telling me to take this shot. I've been shooting mid-range jumpers my whole life. Why am I going to stop taking them now?
Exactly.
That's one approach. And then like in the game of football, I believe that every team in the NFL actually has an analytics department, and they're paying those guys a lot of money to, run the numbers and analyze, well, like this might be a wide receiver, but not all receivers are created equal. Some are more inside guys, some stretch the field, some are better after the catch, some are better route runners, some have a super high target to catch ratio, some are big on third down. Like we can dive all the way in here, right? However, when that head coach walks into his office on Monday morning after a game and he has 3 stacks of notes from the analytics department, the head coaches aren't using that. And they don't have the skill set to break down the data and implement it and allow that to impact their coaching strategy. And that is because the numbers are really, really complex and it's just a lot of information in spreadsheets. The gap right now is making the data easy to understand. So there's more data than we know what to do with, but how can we dumb it down for implementation to actually change the way we're doing things and get total buy-in? And that's the gap that's, I guess you could say, the junction in the road that we're at right now.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned analytics, and basketball has they're still using it a lot. All 30 teams in the NBA are using analytics to an extent. You mentioned it started with Houston, and that's how the whole James Harden craze came about with his 3-point shooting and his scoring outbursts. And like you mentioned, analytics are still being used today in the NBA. Not as much heard about in the NFL, but like you mentioned, they're paying someone up there to do that stuff.
Right? When the Eagles won the Super Bowl, Doug Peterson, and this was like a formula that they were utilizing. He had someone upstairs talking to him in the headset, and they would basically punch into the system like 4th and 1 on the right hash on this yard line, and they would basically give them back like a ratio in which what is the likelihood of them getting it or converting and the type of play that they should run in the situation. And then based on previous times that were in that similar scenario, what the outcome was, and that would be the framework to make that decision. That was one sort of recent model that I've seen utilized in which a coach was actually allowing the analytics to determine their decision making. I've also seen that like certain teams will have a philosophy of like, we're a cover 3 base team and we like cornerbacks that are 6'2 plus. So like there'll be more like analytical driven decisions in specific scenarios, but not like a universal adoption.
Gotcha. Do you feel like analytics was involved when they ran the Philly play in the Super Bowl, or no? Just
I was actually at that Super Bowl.
No way.
Really cool. Yeah, I was fortunate to be at that game. I lived in Minnesota at the time. And the one thing that stood out to me was that the Philadelphia Eagles, they were playing to win. They were hyper aggressive in that game right off the jump. I remember Torrey Smith caught a jump ball over, I think, Stephon Gilmore, his college teammate. No, not Torrey Smith. It was Alshon Jeffrey.
There you go.
He got a big touchdown early in that game. And I was just like, whoa, the Eagles, there's like a certain energy here. And I just every single big spot, they just kept coming up big. And that's how you want to take down a champion, you got to cut their head off. And so the Eagles did that. And so I just felt like that was one team that just like they were rolling the dice a lot. They were playing like they had nothing to lose, and you don't see. And they're also playing with the backup quarterback. Nick Foles won that Super Bowl. So I feel like it was just like the fact that they had to think a little bit differently. They had a win now roster, but they were sort of beat up at a key position. So like they're gonna have to, find some sort of reference point that may be outside of the norm that would facilitate their success. So I do think, to a certain degree, that there was an element of analytics that probably fueled that team's run, and they beat all the best teams to win that Super Bowl.
You mentioned they're not afraid to win. That's clear as to this day too. With when it's 4th and 1 or 4th and inches, we know about the tush push, as they call it there in Philadelphia, the brotherly shove, as they call it in Philadelphia, with Jalen Hurts and whatnot too. So yeah, they play to win, and if the data says it works, which apparently it works 92% of the time, shout out to the Kelsey brothers for that saying. Why not run the brotherly shove every time it's 4th and 1 or 4th and inches, whatever the case may be?
That's why Howie Roseman is the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't think Nick Sirianni is particularly a good coach, and you see the way the players respond to him. Although he went to the Super Bowl, I believe, in like year 2. It's evident that there's not a level of respect. However, that organization is so stable, and they have just a lot of veteran leaders, or they have for an extended period of time, in which, although they were able to shuffle through a different coach, the infrastructure was in place. So I'm sure, like we talked about the tush push in Philadelphia getting very aggressive and having a model in which they're going to just follow this formula every single time they're in that scenario. It's like that stayed tried and true. And so I love that continuity within the building. And so, I'm going to go do some research after we hop off this call.
Definitely.
People are definitely utilizing some analytics because they're doing things differently over there. And they've been good regardless of coach or quarterback. Very impressive.
Indeed. Eagles, though, a lot of teams may not like them, but as coach or their players, they're successful for a reason. And it's because, most likely, of analytics. You talk about coaching, and I want to shift from technology and data to coaching, because you were a coach in your previous experience. You said you were a receivers coach at Concordia University. You were also a coach at St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale as well. I guess for those like myself, because I would love to go down the coaching path one day, and whether it's at the high school level or college or professionals down the line, what advice would you give to those aspiring to be to follow your career path in the coaching field?
Well, a couple things. Once a coach, always a coach. And so I still feel like I'm a coach. And
it definitely.
I don't know what opportunities may present itself, but I believe one day I probably will coach again in some capacity.
Oh, right.
I would love to, but it's not in the cards right now. And I'm fortunate enough to still be able to impact the sport. So it works, but there's something about being on the sideline that makes you feel alive. And definitely. I have to find something similar, or something even close that replicates that type of feeling. And I actually like coaching more than playing. But with that said, no, I believe that if you want to be a coach, it really boils down to people. You have to be a strong communicator. You have to get to the root of understanding what drives different people. What are their motives? What are they trying to achieve? And if you can communicate and get people to trust you, you're going to be able to coach them and get them to perform at a high level. So people must always come first within the realm of coaching. And it was like life experience and moving around different places and going through different things that allowed me to really hone back in the world of sport, in which like those relationships were really all that mattered. Now, most coaches get into it for their love of scheme, and the X's and O's really don't matter. At the end of the day, it's really just about how well your guys execute. And so you have to be a teacher first and foremost. More often than not, at like the high school level, you tend to be a teacher that works in the building, and then you coach as the secondary thing. As I've gotten older, I've become more of a teacher. I currently teach at a university. I've taught at some public and private schools. I love being in a classroom setting. I love to teach why we're doing what we're doing. And so there's an element of, it's one thing to know the scheme, but you got to say why. And so that's incredibly important, but you also got to be willing to suffer. And I say that because you're not going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you really get into it, you're going to travel quite a bit. And it might be good for 3 or 4 years, but as you get a little older, you might get a little lonely, and now you need a partner. And so now you got to go convince, your spouse. You got to get a woman to marry, and then you got to get your spouse.
Exactly.
I love football, and I want to be a coach. We're going to move every 3 years, and I'm going to make no money. Do you really love me? Do you really want to do this? Because it is dark. But if you're willing to make the sacrifice and you continuously learn and you're relentless in not just developing relationships, but networking and putting yourself out there, going on footballscoop.com every year and then going to the coaches convention, which is after the national championship every year, and putting your name out there, you're going to find opportunities. There are a lot of job opportunities, and then be able to dabble between high school, college. You can even intern. There are, as a minority, you can look at the Bill Walsh Minority Coaching Fellowship. They may have changed the name.
Okay.
That's a prominent program in the pro ranks. And so it's really for like coaches just starting out to get that early exposure. But, it just comes down to making that decision, which is really anything in life. And if you just decide that you want to do something and you put all your eggs in that basket, no plan B. There's no plan B. This is what I'm doing, and I'm willing to die behind what I'm doing. If you can just make that decision and continuously learn, I believe that good things are going to happen. So that's what I'd say. Ongoing education, putting yourself out there, being relentless, and putting people first. And if you do those 3 things, I believe anyone can have a moderately successful coaching career. It might be hard to get a wife and keep her, but all the other things she'll work out for you.
As long as you're committed, that's all that matters to what you want to pursue. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I hope to be a coach at some point in time. But I understand, like you mentioned, it takes time, commitment, and the energy and attitude to do so. So great advice by you, Coach, as well. I do want to lighten the conversation a little bit. I know we've strictly talked about.
I mean, I can get deep here and start dropping life lessons here. I don't think that was the initial desired outcome, but wherever you want to go.
Exactly. I love the lessons, Coach. I tell you, it helps out a lot, not just to me, but to our listeners out there as well. But I want to lighten things up and kind of get you have some fun, I guess, per se. And what I mean by that is, I know the NFL season is kind of under everything else. We know the NBA playoffs and baseball, blah blah blah. But the draft just ended, so I have to ask: do you have a favorite team in the NFL? I know you work with players and stuff like that in the past, but there has to be a favorite team that you have.
I do not have a favorite team.
Really?
At all. I probably haven't had a favorite team in about 10 years.
Okay.
I look at football as like a science or an art.
Okay.
But I respect is organizational brilliance. I respect organizations that know what they're doing, that have continuity within the building, that have a philosophy, that have a type of player that they're going to draft year in and year out. And you can begin boiling down players into like archetypes or guys that have a certain level of production in college. And so I'll tell you right now, like I love the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not going to claim a team because I'm just beyond just like, I'm not a fan.
Gotcha.
And like some of these guys are like my peers. If you know, like the coaches. Well, now I'm older than most of the players in the league, but which is funny. But no, so I love what the 49ers are doing. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been tied at the hip. Obviously, they whiffed on Trey Lance, but that's probably the only loss that they've taken. It doesn't matter who you put at quarterback. Kyle Shanahan in positionless football, the way that they're utilizing their personnel and just they are hitting on every player. They're just doing awesome things. Their commitment to the front, the D-line, the front seven has been phenomenal throughout the last like decade or so since Shanahan's been there. And they're going to get a big one at some point. Love what they're doing. Love Sean McVay. The fact I thought last season was so impressive. He's lost all his assistant coaches. They traded all their draft picks. He's essentially turned over an entirely new roster, and he's just still got new guys emerging in that system. There was questions that he may retire. And so for him last year, he's already won a Super Bowl and he's super young. He has nothing to prove, and he's out here still coaching like it's his first year again, and the Rams are still competitive. So that's just remarkable, admirable to say the least. Mike McDaniels, and you see a trend here with these younger guys. I
Yeah,
love
I do. I see.
love his energy, and again, like football, a lot of old dogs, and I say that from the lens of old dog, new tricks, and that was kind of what pushed me away from the industry. Is that I'm an innovator. I think differently. I could tell you about 3 or 4 different ways to actually play the sport of football that no one's even looking at, and utilizing motion in the splits of the O line, or coming down with just 2 down linemen on defense, 2 linebackers, and putting a whole bunch of DBs on the field, which there are teams in college football doing that. Iowa State and Matt Campbell. I love Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Iowa State has had a lot of really good players come out throughout the years. No surprise to me that Brock Purdy was good, might I add. But, focusing more on the NFL game, those are probably the 3 or 4 coaches. Obviously, Andy Reid, offensive mastermind,
100%.
for sure, no doubt about that. But no, I would say that those are the teams. I can't think of anyone off the bat. I'm not going to sit here and reach for you,
Yeah.
but yeah, those are the teams that stand out to me as doing things differently and having. The Baltimore Ravens.
There
The
you
Baltimore
go.
Ravens smash mouth defense. It's almost like one thing. My dad and I we talk about this, like the sociology of the construction of a football team, in which like Pittsburgh, blue collar, just like tradition, their roster sort of like embodies the culture of the city. Same with like New England, Bill Belichick, very analytical, he's academic, okay, kind of like team above all. And that's sort of like the philosophy in New England. Baltimore, just a hard city, it's gritty. Baltimore always plays good defense. They have a quarterback who's sort of like the outlier. I love the 49ers, Silicon Valley, innovation. The 49ers going back to Bill Walsh, who's my favorite football coach probably of all time. You got to see these trends where it's almost like that city and the culture will actually determine the scheme and the identity of the team. Those are those things, between the lines, no pun intended, that reveal why teams are the way that they are. So that's how I look at sport. Very, very different from the actual fan, but like I'm really invested in like looking at like why teams are good. I want insights.
Yeah, it's a unique perspective. Like, as the average fan, it's like, oh, wins and losses, and oh yeah, this player is good, is better than the other person. But when you look at it from your perspective, it's a different yet refreshing way of looking at the sports world. And you mentioned the Rams and the Niners, both teams in the NFC West, but they have great coaches in Shanahan and McVay respectively. We know about the Ravens and what they do over there in Baltimore. And then the young coach Mike McDaniel over there in Miami doing his thing well with the Dolphins. And let's be honest, they use a lot of speed over there, coach. I tell you, no, not to compare, not to reference hyperspeed and the speed of the Dolphins, but they're pretty fast over there. I tell you, coach, with Tyreek Hill and Raheem Mostert, those guys are running like 20, 21 miles per hour. That's data for you if I ever see.
For sure. They've collapsed in December, January, the last 2 years in a row, and we're beginning to see a little bit of a trend. They probably got to be a little bit better defensively, and I don't know if Tua is just like Tua's in that Dak Prescott realm in which like, yeah, talented quarterback, doesn't really make a lot of mistakes per se, but I just don't know if he has what it takes to be a championship caliber quarterback. And so that's what I think the missing link may be right now. But I don't know. I need another year to analyze what they're doing to then give you the full prognosis.
We'll see what the data says, coach, a year from now, with not just Tua, but all the players in the NFL and what the teams will be doing heading into 2024. Coach, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Again, it was an honor and privilege to have to talk to you and just see a different perspective when it comes to football and just sports as a whole with the data analytics and technology and all that stuff. So before you go, I do want to ask, where can people find you, whether it's social media or stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. Twitter, X, Antone G. Wilson, whatever you want to call it. On Instagram, HyperSpeed Sports. I'm going to be deactivating my personal Instagram here shortly. I don't really
Okay.
want to use the platform. So HyperSpeed Sports. I'm on LinkedIn, Antone G. Wilson, YouTube, Antone G. Wilson as well. Any other platforms? I'm on no Facebook yet. And then I write quite a bit on Medium. That's almost like my open forum to the public. I'm currently writing a book talking about my journey and some of the
Okay.
things I discussed, kind of how I went from football coach to tech founder to just the life experience that I've had, because it's been quite a journey. And then obviously our website, which is hyperspeed-usa.com. And I have a podcast called The Performance Pulse, and that is on every platform as well. The key thing right now, which I would, appreciate the most support, would be on our Instagram, HyperSpeed Sports. And that's going to be our prominent platform in which we're just sharing our journey, because we're going to be working with a lot of different athletic programs throughout the country in the upcoming weeks. And it's really exciting. So Antone G. Wilson, HyperSpeed, those are the main names. And if you search that, some stuff will come up.
Sounds good. Coach Wilson, owner of HyperSpeed Performance Technologies, a former college football coach. He's worked with many NFL players, and it's been a pleasure, Coach. So thank you for your time here on the podcast. Thank you guys for watching and listening to us here on the Third and 10 podcast. We'll be back with you on Monday to talk more NFL. And check out Antone G. Wilson and HyperSpeed on social media. And I'll be looking out for your book, Coach. I tell you that much right now. So you got a loyal fan right here for you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Coach. Thank you.